Good morning, and welcome, all of you in the room and those watching from home, or as in the case of Valerie, their mother's home. The planning of this service has had to be very fluid, due of course to COVID, isolation requirements, weddings in Vancouver, funerals in Calgary, and we'd like to thank all of the many folks who are participating today. It's a miracle, actually, that we all made it here. Marv, I think you have a couple of announcements. Anybody else can come forward?
Morning, a couple announcements. Next Sunday, May 1st, is our annual general meeting. Yay! Thank you, thank you. It'll be right after church, so if you're here, just stay and we'll try to keep it short. Or you can attend by Zoom. There'll be a link in the Friday email. We'll be reviewing the 2021 annual report and financial statements and going over the 2022 budget and a few other things. Also, we need a volunteer or two. Imagine that, a church needing volunteers to help count and report our offering. The count room needs a couple of people. They count after most Sunday services, and I don't think it takes very long, and we just need helpers can just help out like once or twice a month. And we could use a count room coordinator who could be one of the counters, and this person schedules the counters and ensures the appropriate paperwork is available for the counters. And in addition, we need someone to take on the position of giving steward. The giving steward is responsible for entering all the donations in the Icon software and issuing tax receipts for the qualifying donations. And if you want more information on this, you can contact Kristen at givingsteward@riverbendunited.org. I'm sure you're all jotting that down. But you can also just contact the church and Jackie will put you in touch. Thank you very much.
Slides. So an update on our solar panel project. Did anybody drive along Riverbend Road on Friday or today? We got 11 panels of 63 up so far. All of them should be physically on, yeah, you can apply, sure, go ahead. All of them should be physically on the building by the end of this week. And we're at about $25,000-ish of the $40,000 target. And I'm going to give you a little talk today about a different aspect of our project. So next slide. So today, we already talked a lot about doing the right thing. And today we're going to talk about how we are doing it. Next slide. So we decided to sole source this entire project to one company. That's right, we sole sourced it. We didn't get any competitive bids. And you might be thinking, that's not very responsible of us. Next slide. So this is who we sole sourced it to. I know it's spelt Nuo, it's pronounced Newo. And I can safely say there is no solar panel vendor in Alberta that has better alignment with United Church of Canada and Riverbend United Church's values. They are a registered nonprofit here in Alberta. There's a lot of First Nation ownership of this. They're guided by, I'm going to butcher some Cree here, so anybody who speaks Cree, you can correct me. They're guided by the principles of 𝘍𝘢𝘾 and 𝘍𝘢𝘆, which is basically living in harmony and sharing abundance. You can find them at newo.energy. And by the way, .energy is like a .com domain name. Next slide. So Newo has been in our community since 2016, believe it or not. They've done a lot of good things. I first heard about them because they're doing some stuff with the Bissell Center. And part of me went, if they're good enough for the Bissell Center, they're good enough for Riverbend United. But the pictures here are actually of them putting solar panels on the 𝘍𝘗 building in Edmonton. So next slide. So they have sort of some aspects. The first one is they do some services. They do building energy audits, and they design and install solar panels on buildings. They also run some programs. And so how it basically works is because they're a not-for-profit, they have some things where they charge for stuff, and then they use that surplus to fund programs. And some of the programs they do are on food sovereignty, permaculture, skills training, and they support survivors of domestic violence. So next slide. Joby is my favorite guy I've met there. Joby's a graduate of their solar panel training program, and in our installation, they actually have 6 people doing the installation, 4 of which are First Nations, 3 of which are learning how to do solar installations under their master installer, who's been doing it for a very long time. And so Joby came out of the program with the skills he have, and he has ties with the Alexics First Nation just nearby, and he's running a program to help teach people how to do energy audits and how to do the renovations required to support those energy audits in residential buildings. So that's one of the things they're doing. The other one is, I'm not going to try the Cree because I have a thick Anglo-Saxon tongue, the Abundance Project, and they really do talk about this a lot in their literature about what does sharing abundance look like in a land that has given us so much, how do we give back to it? And one of the projects is they're working with the Solar Powered Investment Cooperative of Edmonton, SPICE, to put about $200,000 solar installation on the Bissell Center. Next slide. So hopefully I've convinced you that 𝗍𝘀 is a great partner for us. I mean, they align with our mission and service, our outreach, our reconciliation, and some of you might be thinking, yeah, Matthew, but it's $70,000. And I know you brought on the expansion on time and on budget, but really? Sole source? Well, next slide. You see, they're also recommended by the United Church of Canada. And I like saying if I need moral guidance, if I need spiritual advice, the United Church of Canada is a great place to go. But if I want, public health advice, financial planning, construction management, contractor selection, project management, they're not the go-to people. So I actually did some background. So I installed solar panels on my house. I went out and I found the 5 best vendors I could find in Edmonton, and I picked what I thought was the best one. 𝗍𝘀 wasn't one of the 5. Next slide. So I have firsthand experience comparing 𝗍𝘀 to what I thought was the best vendor in Edmonton. So when we talk about project management, it's scope, schedule, budget. In terms of scope, I tried to get my preferred vendor who did my house to give us a firm quote on doing the church. It took them over 2 months, and I was a repeat client. 𝗍𝘀, I reached out to, it's like, yeah, sure, I'll give them a quote. They turned around a budget quote to me in less than 2 weeks. I referred 𝗍𝘀 to one of my friends because they do residential buildings also. 𝗍𝘀 turned around a quote in 4 days. During the bidding process on our building, they visited the building twice. My preferred vendor, the first time they showed up to my house was the day they were going to install, and they brought the wrong stuff. Yeah. So in terms of service, they're pretty good. In terms of schedule, 𝗍𝘀 was quoted us 3 months. Now, I've dealt with a lot of contractors in my life, so when they say 3 months, I hear 4. They actually started installation in 2 months. Speaking with my preferred vendor, who I have good terms on, they're quoting 3, and they're saying they're actually delivering in about 5. On my house, they're only about 4 months after the promised install date. So they're fantastic on schedule. And then on budget, their base price was $2.11 installed a watt. Now we've added some extras to that because we're a church, but $2.11 is a fantastic price. And if it's not the best price you can get in Edmonton, it's pretty close to the best price. Their commercial terms are actually better than that of their competitors. I joke, their competitors pretend they do the Tesla model. Give me half the money today and I promise to install some solar panels on your house at some point. These guys' commercial terms are much better than that. And so basically, 𝗍𝘀 is as good or better than everybody else in Edmonton. And that's why we sole sourced with them. And we can feel good about who's doing the work for us. Thank you. And you can always write checks and send money for more solar panels because, again, we're at a little over halfway of our target. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Matt went out of order. So I guess we go ahead with the introit. Please join me in the call to worship. God is holy mystery, beyond complete knowledge, above perfect description. Yet in love, the one eternal God seeks relationship. So God creates the universe, and with it, the possibility of being and relating. God enlivens the universe, guiding all things towards harmony with their source. Grateful for God's action, we cannot keep from singing. We witness to holy mystery that is holy love. Nothing exists that does not find its source in God. Finding ourselves in a world of beauty and mystery of living things, diverse and interdependent, of complex patterns of growth and evolution of subatomic particles and cosmic swirls, we sing of God the Creator, the maker and source of all that is.
Today is very much inspired by the deeply profound line from our new creed, to live with respect in creation. A new creed was originally proposed in 1968, but this line was not added until 1995, under the influence of the very Reverend 𝘍𝘐 a member of the Fisher River Cree Nation in Manitoba and the first Indigenous person to serve as moderator of the United Church. In defending the addition to the creed and changing the original word slightly, the original proposed line was to care for creation. Reverend 𝘍𝘐 was drawing on the deep wisdom of his ancestral spirituality, that humans do not exist outside of creation, that they do not care or control or tame creation, but are instead one strand of the great web of creation. And living on earth means moving in rhythm, in the rhythm of creation. As Reverend 𝘍𝘐 said, living with respect in creation means vibrating to the pulse of life in a natural way without having to own the source of the music. The path toward reconciliation between our people has been long and painful. One of the acts of reconciliation is to acknowledge that the land on which we worship today was for millennia the home and traveling routes of many other peoples, the Cree, the Blackfoot, Métis, Inuit, and other peoples. The treaties mean that we are all treaty people. And Reverend 𝘍𝘐 reminds us that Indigenous teachings focus on the connections of the whole of creation, and that the Creator places us in relationship to all that is. We acknowledge this deep wisdom, that all of creation is sacred, and that here, now, and in fact everywhere we go in this world, we are standing on holy ground.
Standing on holy ground.
I think that deserves a whoo! Actually, I'm the first person that heard the chorus to that hymn. It was written by our dear friends Mark and Judy Pearson, or Hapso, Judy Pearson Hapso, who are the parents of our daughter Molly's best friend, 𝘖𝘵. Molly and 𝘖𝘵 met in Naramata and became fast friends. However, the family lived in Camrose, where Mark was a choral professor at Augustana. Judy and I spent a lot of hours driving back and forth from Camrose listening to Backstreet Boys and the soundtrack to Wicked. One day they arrived at the house and the door burst open and Judy just about bowled me over on her way by. Now, anyone who's almost been bowled over by a middle-aged woman after a long car drive knows where she's heading. But you'd be wrong, because she headed straight to our piano to belt out that chorus, which she'd written on the road from Camrose. It never fails to stir my heart. And actually, the Hapso family performed it at Molly's wedding. So, children's time. If there are any kids in the congregation who'd like to join us down here, I'm going to be reading a story, and Addie and Crystal are going to be providing some props, which perhaps we can distribute later. So the story was written by Molly, that daughter I just mentioned, who is currently a grade 4-5 teacher in North Vancouver. The Little Growing Gardener.
By the band, providing a little background music. Inch by inch and row by row, gonna make this garden grow. All it takes is a rake and a hoe and a piece of fertile ground. Inch by inch, row by row, God bless these seeds I sow. Summer warmed them from below till the rain comes tumbling down.
The little girl always knew she wanted to be a gardener. She loved walking through the gardens, breathing in the sweet smells, hearing the bees buzz, waiting in anticipation for the bursting colors of spring, and watching the other gardeners carefully water, weed, and prune their perfect little plots. She imagined herself helping flowers of all different colors and shapes growing in neat little rows. There was only one problem. Her garden was anything but perfect. Again and again, the little girl would lovingly put her seeds in the ground in a sunny spot. She tried to be careful as she planted them in neat little rows, but it was really tough to get it just right. She wanted to make sure the seeds had plenty of water and sunlight because she'd been told that it was very important in helping them to grow, but sometimes she was so busy enjoying the sunshine on hot days that she would forget to give them a drink. Other times, she was worried about how thirsty they might be and would overwhelm them with all the water she poured over them. She ripped out every weed she saw. She shooed away any insects or animals that came by. She bought the best fertilizer that money could buy, and she pulled out any flower that started growing in what she thought was the wrong way. And then there was the waiting. Waiting. She would wait and wait and wait and wait and wait. Please, little seeds, please grow. But the seeds refused to grow. She saw many beautiful gardens around her with blooming rose bushes and sky-high sunflowers, but all she had was a patch of dirt. The little girl felt impatient and disheartened. She cared so much and her intentions were good, but at the end of the season, all she had left was an empty garden plot and a pile of weeds and sprouts that hadn't grown in the right spot. That's it, she thought to herself. I'm never going to be a gardener. I give up.
Pulling weeds and picking stones, we are made of dreams and bones. I feel the need to grow my own, 'cause the time is close at hand. Grain for grain, sun and rain, find my way in nature's chain. Tune my body and my brain to the music of the land. Inch by inch and row by row, gonna make this garden grow. All it takes is a rake and a hoe and a piece of fertile ground. Inch by inch, row by row, God bless the seeds I sow. Summer warm them from below till the rain comes tumbling down.
She swept her pile of garden rubbish behind a nearby tree and decided to go for a walk in the forest. She wanted to clear her head as far away from the gardens as she could get. She was unfamiliar with the forest, but she saw a path at the entrance and aimlessly wandered in. She found a spot to sit beneath a gigantic tree. She gazed upwards and noticed how the canopy of trees made room for each other without colliding, allowing space for other branches and leaves to grow. The sunshine peeked through the spaces between them. Wow, the little girl thought, it's like they're communicating with each other. Just then, a strong wind blew through the leaves of the tree, rustling the branches. She looked up in wonder. All at once, the forest was both silent and loud, buzzing and alive. It whispered to her, listen to the story of the land. Feeling a little bit silly, she looked at the tree that had been providing her with a comfortable thinking spot and asked it, how did you become so tall and strong? What do you need to grow? To her surprise, the formidable tree took a deep breath and responded in a voice that echoed generations. Deep roots and patience. The little girl looked down at the roots that covered the forest floor that she had not noticed until now. She thought about the roots that might be under her garden plot that she was ignoring or hurting to try and achieve what she thought was a perfect garden. She thought about her haste as she planted her seeds and her disappointment when she didn't see immediate payoff. She gently placed her hand on its thick trunk. Thank you, tree. As she began to walk home, she started to notice things she'd never noticed before. She saw the ground covered with ferns growing in different directions. What do you need to grow? She asked the fern. Community, a little voice replied to her. We create a home for small animals in the winter and provide food for big animals. The little girl thought of the critters she had shooed away, thinking that she was protecting her garden. What an incredible notion that the garden could be providing for others while it was growing. Thank you, ferns. She was filled with excitement at her new discoveries. She continued on the path, talking to different green and growing things along the way. What do you need to grow? She asked the wildflowers. The wildflowers taught her that they all came from different families and needed different environments to grow. Some grew in the rain, some needed the earth to be dry, some wanted to help the people who lived on the land, and some did not want to be touched at all. Thank you, wildflowers.
Plant your rows straight and long, temper them with prayer and song. Mother Earth will make you strong if you give her loving care. An old crow watches hungrily in his perch from yonder tree. In my garden I'm as free as that feathered leaf up there. Inch by 𝗍𝗏𝗃, I'm gonna make this garden grow. All it takes is a rake and a hoe and a piece of fertile ground. Inch by inch, row by row, God bless the seeds I sow. Summer warm them from below till the rain comes tumbling down.
As the sunlight passed between the moving branches and she felt the warmness of the day shift to the cool twilight, she began to head home. Her head was spinning with all that she had learned. As she got to the head of the path that had led her into the forest, she closed her eyes and felt the buzzing of the land and the stillness within herself. The next day, she marched out to the garden plots. As she walked back through the perfect gardens, she began to notice that some of the tall sunflowers looked lonely. The perfectly potted peonies were protected by sharp metal fences to keep rabbits from eating them. They were beautiful gardens with incredible results, but the little girl knew that that wasn't the kind of gardener she wanted to be. When she got to her empty garden plot, she looked at it for a long time. The other gardeners gave her curious looks as she began to take down the little fence surrounding it, allowing soil to spill out onto the freshly mowed lawn. The curious looks turned into hushed chatter as she lay down on the soft earth. "I'm sorry I wasn't listening before," she whispered to her garden. "What do you need?" This isn't the end of the story of the little girl and her garden. Sometimes she felt so tired that she didn't think she had any more patience. But the gardeners around her supported her and shared their wisdom when she couldn't hear the land. She continued to learn and listen. She continued to make mistakes, but she realized that oftentimes what she considered failures or waste made for really good fertilizer. Many, many years later, the little girl looked at her wild garden and was reminded of her walk in the forest when she had almost given up on being a gardener. She smiled to herself, imagining herself as one of the flowers that had been planted that day.
Inch by inch, row by row, I'm gonna make this garden grow. All it takes is a rake and a hoe and a piece of fertile ground. Inch by inch, row by row, God bless the seeds I sow. Summer warm them from below till the rain comes tumbling down.
Everybody.
Inch by inch, row by row, gonna make this garden grow. All it takes is a rake and a hoe and a piece of fertile ground. Inch by inch, row by row, God bless the seeds I sow. Summer warm them from below till the rain comes tumbling down.
Thank you, Joe.
Our first reflection today, oh, sorry.
Yeah, I think what we'll do is we'll start with the Psalm, Psalm 104, and we'll use the first refrain and we'll do part one. Praise God, O my soul.
Eternal God, you are great indeed.
You clothe yourself with light like a garment.
You spread the heavens like a tent.
You lay out the beams of your dwelling on the waters above. Oh. You make the clouds your chariot and ride on the wings of the wind.
You make the winds your messengers and flames of fire your servants.
You fix the earth on its foundations so that it can never tremble.
You cover the earth with the ocean as with a cloak.
Bless, O
My soul, the Almighty, rules all creation.
When the waters covered the mountains, they fled at your rebuke.
At the sound of your thunder, they took flight.
They flowed over the mountains, ran down the valleys to the place you had appointed for them.
There you set limits not to be passed, that they might not again cover the earth.
bless, O my soul, the Almighty, rules all creation.
Okay, now our first reflection will be from Lindsay Vanderhook. Lindsay discovered Riverbend United and has been attending online for about a year and a half. She's obviously been paying attention, too, because she recognized Doug's name from an e-transfer he made to her flower farm for a bouquet he bought at her pay-by-donation roadside booth. Lindsay's a recent graduate of a master's in environmental sociology, where she interacts with the importance of Indigenous people and their knowledge systems being leaders in conservation work. Lindsay. Okay.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay? I was going to be more comfortable on the floor over there, but I thought maybe this would be okay if I got so nervous I had to fall over, lean against the pulpit. So yeah, my name is Lindsay, and it's been a gift to be able to participate through online, through COVID, and I've just really appreciated being a part virtually. So I don't know many of you, so I hope that what I speak about is meaningful in some way and not, I hope it's meaningful for you as well. So as Jill said, I have a small flower farm just southwest of the city, and it's called Swallowtail Flowers. And this is going to be the 5th year that I grow flowers and sell bouquets at a honor system stand. And I would say after hearing the story written by Molly, I'm kind of like the gardener taking a walk in the forest and having some questions about how does this look. My intentions have been to grow with looking to creation for lessons in how to grow, but also I'm still a Western European Dutch immigrant who likes everything perfect, right? So what can we learn? So also I'm a recent graduate from U of A, and as Jill said, so just really sitting with some ideas that are newer to me, perhaps not newer to all of you, listening to what Doug said about the statement of faith and living in respect with creation, rather than a line saying humans caring for creation. So I'm going to share a little bit. Hopefully it's not too long. I'm also going to share from this book, which you may have heard of, Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. And she is a botanist, scientist, professor, and also a member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation, which is kind of near New York and part of a larger group of different indigenous communities in the Great Lakes region. So this book has been quite meaningful to me in the last year. So my background is environmental studies and theology, and through a lot of my schooling and career work in Vancouver, volunteering and different activities, I've always been really focused on how are we humans called to care for creation. From participating in climate marches to organizing pastor conferences, working to reduce waste, and also experiencing frustration at housemates who don't seem to care, to working and managing community gardens and small-scale farms. With good intention and full belief that God calls all of us to live in harmony and right relationship with the rest of creation, a vision that I have learned to be called shalom from the Hebrew scriptures. Being rooted in right relationship. This right relationship of doing everything right, including taking reusable bags to the grocery store, can also become really burdensome at times, and especially when becoming aware how easy it is to be a thoughtless consumer rather than an intentional consumer. While 100% I think and believe that the way I live and all of us live is important for caring for all the beings around us, 𝙍𝙐𝘾 uses the term more than human beings rather than non-humans, just to give respect to all the plants and animals and trees, etc. So I'll use that term, more than human beings. While these actions are all really important, coming from a human to caring for creation, I've also been pondering and sitting with some concepts that are newer to me, where I've been introduced to a different way of thinking for me and being in relationship with what I would call the environment. Many conservationists and nature lovers, especially settlers or non-Indigenous people throughout our more Western world, seek to care for and preserve biodiversity in ways that generally keep humans out of conservation areas, communicating that humans are kind of bad for the environment or should not touch things. Don't touch, just stay out. We seek nature for spiritual renewal and beauty and as a repository for biodiversity, but generally humans can stay out or just look. Yet many Indigenous communities, in this context First Nations, Métis and Inuit, and Native American, live and continue to live where they're able to in a much more intimate relationship with the land, water, plants, and animals, where actually the most biodiversity on Earth is actually found in these places, where Indigenous people are living in reliance on the land for what they receive from it. There is much more to this, but to stay focused on this reflection, this way of thinking and being, what I'm familiar with, where humans are more separate from nature, like don't touch, just look, or we are called as Christians to care for creation, again, kind of creating a separation, towards ways in which many Indigenous communities understand and live out in ways I'm no expert to talk about, but I'm just learning, has inspired me to deepen my relationship with what is around me. I spend a lot of time walking in forests and conservation areas. One of my favorite places is Bunchberry Meadows, close to my home. I'll forever, and also in the garden, obviously. It's a 1-acre garden that I have. I'll forever be in awe at the orangeness of a carrot when you pull it out of the ground. How did that get orange? It's amazing. How did that amaranth plant, which is now 6 feet tall as me, and so magenta colored, come from this tiny, tiny seed within 3 months? It's incredible. I'm always in awe at so many things. I certainly receive a sense of well-being and health from being in these places and spaces. One quote from my previous work of laboriously pushing others to care for creation, like no plastic bags, is, "We care for only what we love. We love only what we know, and we know only what we experience." That's kind of was something that I used a lot as I thought through these things. 𝙍𝙐𝘾 has deepened this for me in sharing how she and her ancestors relate with more than human beings. In her chapter, Epiphany in the Beans, she talks about the wonders of being in her garden and how plants are caring for her as much as she is for them. So I'm going to read two little excerpts for you from this book. And one is just to kind of paint the picture of her being in the garden, and then the second is a bit of a reflection. So if you're bored, you can close your eyes for a minute and listen too. So here she is in her garden. Maybe it was the smell of ripe tomatoes, or the oriole singing, or that certain slant of light on a yellow afternoon and the beans hanging thick around me. It just came to me in a wash of happiness that made me laugh out loud, startling the chickadees who were picking at the sunflowers, raining black and white hulls on the ground. I knew it with a certainty as warm and clear as the September sunshine. The land loves us back. She loves us with beans and tomatoes, with roasting ears and blackberries and bird songs, by a shower of gifts and a heavy rain of lessons. She provides for us and teaches us to provide for ourselves. That's what good mothers do. I looked around at the garden and could feel her delight in giving us these beautiful raspberries, squash, basil, tomato, asparagus, lettuce, kale and beets, and more. It reminded me of my little girl's answer to "How much do I love you?" "This much." With arms stretched wide, they replied. This is why I made my daughters learn to garden, so they would always have a mother to love them long after I am gone. The Epiphany in the Beans. I spend a lot of time thinking about our relationships with land, how we are given so much and what we might give back. I try to work through the equations of reciprocity and responsibility, the whys and wherefores of building sustainable relationships with ecosystems, all in my head. But suddenly there was no intellectualizing, no rationalizing, just the pure sensation of baskets full of mother love, the ultimate reciprocity, loving and being loved in return. So I'm going to invite you, if you want, to close your eyes for a minute, and think of a place in, whether it's a conservation area or the river or your garden, that you really love. And just imagine that for a minute. And I'm going to read this, and then I'll leave just a brief moment of silence for you to ponder this excerpt. I sat once in a graduate writing workshop on relationships to the land. The students all demonstrated a deep respect and affection for nature. They said that nature was the place where they experienced the greatest sense of belonging and well-being. They professed without reservation that they loved the earth. And then I asked them, "Do you think that the earth loves you back?" No one was willing to answer that. It was as if I had brought a two-headed porcupine into the classroom, unexpected and prickly. They backed slowly away. Here was a room full of writers, passionately wallowing in unrequited love of nature. So I made it hypothetical and asked, what do you suppose would happen if people believed this crazy notion that the earth loved them back? The floodgates opened. They all wanted to talk at once. We were suddenly off the deep end, heading for world peace and perfect harmony. One student summed it up: "You wouldn't harm what gives you love." Knowing that you love the earth changes you, activates you to defend and protect and celebrate. But when you feel that the earth loves you in return, that feeling transforms the relationship from a one-way street into a sacred bond. In the journey of being in relationship with each other as humans and more than human beings around us, we know that certain human lifestyles really are destroying ecosystems, that we really do need to put solar panels on the roof. I wonder how this story and way of being could inspire deeper relationships, where living respectfully with other beings around us isn't a chore, but a deep blessing, a sacred bond. Kimmerer suggests planting a garden, and I second that. And if anyone doesn't have a garden, come and help me in my garden. And also to see her invitation towards a deeper relationship as a way to inspire mutual respect and love with land, plants, trees, air, water, and animals who may just want to love us back. Could this also be a way of God loving us back? When I'm in the garden this summer, I'll be definitely thinking about some of these ideas. And definitely come and visit me.
Please join us, rise if you're able or want to, and with more voices. Sorry, don't have my glasses on. 41. Oh, beautiful Gaia.
Next reflection is from Madison Prairie and Luke Nelson, who are our youth leaders. They're both, as Luke spoke last week, you heard his passionate interest in environment.
Good morning, everyone. So last week, I talked a little bit about how a lot of us have lost our connection to nature, or at least lost a lot of it. And how, in my opinion, this is one of the main reasons why it's very difficult for society to justify taking decisive action against the environmental catastrophes that we're seeing nowadays. I think it's tricky for us when we're living in the city to see how large of a role nature plays in our day-to-day lives. With concrete and manicured lawns surrounding us, it may feel like we are the masters of our own little planet, free to change it as we like without repercussions. But realistically, when we look at this, that's not the case. Humans have dramatically changed the world around us in ways that it will take a long time to recover from. An example that comes to mind, just from a conversation I had with Doug a couple weeks ago, the wildlife of Alberta has been significantly changed just over the past couple centuries with colonialism. As an example, Alberta used to be home to incredibly large numbers of bison. And I think it's hard to wrap our minds around how incredibly large those numbers were. Estimates are as large as 30 million over the plains of North America, 30 million bison just roaming around. That's, to put it in perspective, similar to the population of all of Canada in terms of humans. That's a remarkable number. And now that number's being reduced to a mere tiny proportion of that, and they're living in fractured landscapes in parks. But that's just an example of how humans have dramatically changed that. And that alteration of the landscape doesn't just affect the landscape, but it affects humans directly. Indigenous people lived off bison for centuries as one of their primary sources of food. And when that change happens, it dramatically changes their lifestyle as well as just the land around it. This demise of the Plains bison may seem somewhat detached from some of the issues that we're facing now, but I think one of the primary reasons that all of these environmental catastrophes that we're seeing nowadays are connected is it's got to do with this exploitative relationship that we have with nature. Rather than living in harmony with nature, we see nature as something that we can take from to help ourselves, rather than this kind of relationship that Lindsay talked about, the very holistic, living within nature kind of mentality that we can see in Indigenous groups all over the world. And I think as Christians, we need to start thinking about how Christianity influences how we see our relationship with nature. As I mentioned last week, the United Church is very clear about humanity's place as interconnected part of creation. We talked about in the Anew Creed, Doug mentioned earlier today, how they've got that really nice line about humans living within creation rather than taking care of creation. And I think at the same time, it's also important to note that the Bible is not always as clear about this same sentiment. In the creation stories of Genesis, there is a consistent idea that the world was made for humanity and that we have dominion over the other parts of creation. I tend to believe that this attitude is problematic. In the six-day creation story, for example, man was not created at the same time as the rest of the world's organisms, but was designed by God on the last day and told that the world was ours. As a quote, God said to rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. This idea of ruling, I think, plays a bit of a role in terms of our relationship with nature now. Of course, biblical creation stories must be understood allegorically, and they must be understood in the context that they were written in. There is plenty of wisdom to be found in them, but I think it is also important to consider how they may influence our understanding of our place in the world. The world does not simply exist to fulfill our needs, and we need to resist this fallacy. I think, on the other hand, much wisdom can be found from Indigenous peoples across the world on this topic, and this is something Maddie's going to talk a little bit about now.
Sorry, I'm very short. Okay, so in Alberta, there are 44 First Nations, 8 Métis settlements, and many urban Indigenous communities, each with their own unique body of knowledge and each with their own unique creation story. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the Blackfoot creation story of the Earth Diver. And I'm going to read an excerpt here for you. Long ago, there was a time when water covered the entire earth. 𝗔𝘂, the creator, wanted to know what happened below all of this water. He sent a duck, an otter, then a badger, but all came up with nothing. Finally, a muskrat dove beneath the water and was down for a very long time. He returned with a ball of mud in his paws. 𝗔𝘂 took the lump and blew on it until it dried, and it was transformed into the earth. He molded the hills, valleys, and mountains with his hands. He created groves in the earth for rivers and lakes. The first people were molded from this earth, and 𝗔𝘂 taught men and women how to hunt and live. Once 𝗔𝘂 felt his work was complete, he climbed up to a mountain peak and disappeared. In this creation story, we see that humans are just another creation. They aren't told that they are in charge or more important or separate from any of the other creation. And Indigenous worldviews often see the world as non-hierarchical. All things are being equally important. And there's sort of this circular belief, everything is connected, nothing is above anything else. And these worldviews often influence Indigenous practices, which in turn influence the way in which Indigenous knowledge is acquired. Indigenous knowledge being the active relationship between people, history, and the environment. Similar to Lindsay, I'm also talking about braiding sweetgrass. So if you need a book recommendation, clearly that's a good one. In the book, she describes an experiment that a graduate student of hers is doing, in which they take 3 plots of sweetgrass and test them to see how different harvesting methods will contribute to the decline. There are plots which were harvested in traditional methods, carefully pinching the plant at the base, and others which were harvested roughly by yanking upwards, sometimes leaving gaps in the soil. And the last plots, which served as a control, were not harvested at all. The unharvested plots were absolutely failing by the end of the experiment. They found that picking the sweetgrass stimulated the growth. The graduate students' committee had been reluctant to allow the experiment in the first place and seemed confused with the result. How was it possible that the sweetgrass which had not been touched was failing, and the sweetgrass which had been picked had somehow stimulated growth? However, Robin and her graduate student knew that the traditional knowledge which informed Indigenous sweetgrass harvesting was based in science. She explained how Indigenous people have been conducting scientific experiments for years and using their observations to inform practice. Much of Indigenous knowledge, similar to the sweetgrass example, is land-based. The knowledge of which berries are safe to eat, when salmon will spawn, or when Arctic ice will melt, allowing passage to hunting grounds. All of this knowledge is locationally specific. However, much of this knowledge is challenged by the changing conditions of Earth. Climate change has brought unpredictability. It has made teachings which have been passed down since time immemorial untrue, needing to change. Indigenous peoples have passed down their knowledge, and the change in the environments are abundantly clear to those who see the teachings they have been taught since childhood, their parents and grandparents saying, "What was true when I was young is no longer true for you." Needing to change these practices and seeing as you go out into the world, going to pass through the Arctic ice and seeing it's melted sooner than expected, or passages you would expect to be able to go through are blocked, changes what you are able to do. And while it may be easy for us to become complacent from the comfort of our homes, separate from nature, or so we think, we need to ask ourselves why we see ourselves as separate from nature, why we see ourselves as more important than those facing consequences of climate change already, and why we see ourselves as more important than those more than humans that Lindsay was talking about. Humans are not a supreme being. Rather, we are equal in value to all others, all living creatures on this planet, and all non-living creatures as well. As the environment shifts due to climate change, so does the relationship with land. As we have placed Earth in the balance, it's up to us to enact change and stop tipping the scale in the wrong direction.
Thank you.
Madison. It's hard to hear the youth look at our world that we're leaving and lament. And this song, what we're going to do now, is a lament. The ensemble we often do in the tradition of Barb Myers is a diaconal minister out in Silver Lake, and she for years ran a course at Naramata called Jesus on the Charts. And what she'd do is look at popular music and look for the spiritual message in simple popular songs. This is a song that was actually written 52 years ago. And it was when I was in high school, everybody owned this album. It was by Cat Stevens, who became Yusuf Islam, who's now Yusuf. He was a wonderful songwriter. He wrote this song 52 years ago, lamenting the environmental situation. And here we are 52 years later, still lamenting. The song's called "Where Do the Children Play?" Well, I think it's fine building jumbo planes or taking a ride on a cosmic train. You can switch on summer from a slot machine. Yeah, you can get what you want to if you want, 'cause you can get anything. I know we've come a long way. We're changing day to day, yeah. But tell me, where do the children play? Well, you roll on roads over fresh green grass for your lorry loads. Pump petrol gas. You make them long and you make them tough, but they just go on, and it seems that you can't get off. Come a long way. We're changing day to day, yeah. But tell me, where do the children play? On building higher till there's no more room up there. Will you make us laugh? Will you make us cry? Will you tell us when to live? Will you tell us when to die? I know we've come a long way. We're changing day to day. Tell me, where do the children play? I was going to do a little bit of a reflection, which had a little bit more hope in it. Because this is the week after Easter, after all. A week ago, we celebrated Easter. We were triumphant. It was our holy day. We got to hear Marv on the trumpet. It was awesome. But Easter week is always a little disorienting. We go from the hosannas of Palm Sunday to the turbulence and intrigue of Maundy Thursday, to the horror of Good Friday, the torture and the execution of Jesus, and then suddenly to the triumph of Easter Sunday. You know, that little interlude between Friday and Sunday. Like in pre-COVID days, sometimes we'd have a vigil at the church, but most of the time it's just kind of glossed over because we know how the story ends, because we're Easter people. And it's sometimes easy to forget that Easter Sunday, even though it's a triumph, for centuries after the crucifixion of Jesus, Christianity didn't seem that triumphant. Jesus' people were persecuted and executed. Jesus' teachings were passed on scraps of parchment paper. At one point, the whole of Christianity was clinging precariously to the islands off the coast of Ireland, where generations of monks dutifully copied the gospel teachings and kept them alive when they had been all but erased from the European continent. For most of the last 2,000 years, Christians lived in the shadow of the cross, keeping the good news alive by love, by hope, by courage, and by works of almost unimaginable faith. One of the practices I try to do around Easter is to really try to imagine myself as a disciple of Jesus during that turbulent time after the crucifixion. What was that like? the not knowing how it was going to turn out, how to look deeply for the courage to face the fear, the faith to heal the grief, the hope to overcome the despair. And now it seems I don't have to imagine anymore. Because as we celebrate this Earth Day, it really is with a profound sense of uncertainty. Luke and Madison have sketched out the magnitude of the challenges ahead. The past 2 years have certainly upset our routines and our expectations. Pandemics, crises, social and economic unrest, war, and hanging over everything, a climate crisis brought about by human behavior, with extreme weather being an expectation and not an exception. So here we are, Good Friday people, dealing with the not knowing. Where do we find our inspiration? I often think of the great Christian mystic Meister Eckhart. Writing in the 15th century, he said, "What good is it to me that Mary gave birth to the Son of God 1400 years ago, and I do not also give birth to the Son of God in my time and in my culture? We are all meant to be mothers of God. God is always needing to be born." I find that so inspiring and so connected to the creation-centered spirituality that we've talked about today, that we are not outside of creation, but deeply embedded in it, able to give birth to new ideas, creative solutions to the problems that face us. To live with respect in creation requires, as Molly said in her book, deep roots, patience, community. It also takes courage to act in the face of fear, hope to act in the face of despair, faith to act in the face of not knowing. But even though we're a Good Friday people, we also have been witness to an Easter miracle. And that gives me faith that we can witness another. Thanks be to God.
I think given the time, we're not as good as Valerie at judging our time management for this service. We're going to ask you to do your prayers on your own, and perhaps even to read the new creed for yourself. Oh, it's down, darn. Well, it's Voices United 9:18. I think we've made enough reference to what we consider as one of the most important lines that you can do that. And we'll end with the parting hymn, My Love Colors Outside the Lines. More voices, 138.
And you can stand as you're able and try to keep up.
Brandy, bring us in.
My love colors outside the line, exploring paths that you could ever find. And it takes me in places where I've never been before, and opens doors, the world's outside the line. My Lord colors outside the line, turns wounds to blessings, water into wine. Takes me into places where I've never been before, and opens doors to worlds outside the line. We'll never walk on water if we're not prepared to drown. Body and soul need a soaking from time to time. We'll never move the gravestones if we're not prepared to drown and realize there are worlds outside the lines. And we'll never walk on water if we're not prepared to drown. Body and soul need a soaking from time to time. And we'll never move the gravestones if we're not prepared to die and realize there are worlds outside the lines. My soul longs to color outside the lines. Tear back the curtains, sun, come in and shine. I want to walk beyond the boundaries where I've never been before, to open doors, the world's outside the
So may we go into this world with an appreciation of the beauty of creation, the appreciation of the sun on our faces, and the wind in what's left of our hair. God bless you until we meet again, and may the peace of God be your peace. Go in peace.